All right, so it's a huge thrill for me today. We are joined by the owner of Goodie's Frozen Treats and Custards from all the way in Alexandria, Virginia, there in the DMV area, Brandon Byrd. We have followed your company for about 2 years here at Velma Jackson High School, and this is for our entrepreneurship class here at Velma Jackson. I've got a room full here with me, and we're recording this for our friends at Madison Central High School, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, and for our YouTube channel. And it is such a thrill to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. And I look forward to having a healthy and informative conversation with you guys.
Well, I appreciate it. Now, obviously, Goodie's Frozen Treats and Custards, you guys specialize in frozen desserts. And just looking at your in the milkshakes and just so many things that just look unbelievably awesome. But before we get into that, you have kind of a cool background of what you were doing before you became an entrepreneur, because you were rubbing shoulders with celebrities. So take us a little bit about your background, because I think it's pretty cool how you transition from that career into being a business owner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my background is actually brand marketing and experiential marketing, and I've worked for a number of Fortune 500 companies, from Bacardi to Coors, Red Bull. My last company that I worked for is hip hop magazine called Double XL or XXL magazine out of New York City. I was their marketing and events director, so I handled all of the strategic partnerships. I would create marketing programs for our advertisers. So I would just do things outside the box, like how can we get Heineken, or how can we get Courvoisier or Hennessy, or some of those spirits that are advertisers in the magazine. How can you get them more value for their advertising dollars, right? So a lot of that came from, yes, you have your traditional print. We're going to have a certain build out for online activation, but more importantly, I really was tasked with handling the experiential side of it as well, right? So, and what I mean by that is taking a concept and then making it a live experience. And so, there was a tour that I did, a program called Double XL Live, and it was more of like a small, intimate tour. We worked with Double XL has an annual Freshman's magazine, which is like the up and coming artists or rappers. And so one of the things that I would do, I'm like, well, this is what Double XL is known for, is this freshman issue. Why not take some of those rising stars, put them on the road, 10, 12 cities throughout the US, but instead of an arena, we're going to take it to a small, intimate venue where, the 400, let's just say, or 300 guests, they have a really phenomenal experience, and they're up and close and personal with someone like a Kendrick Lamar before he became the marquee artist Kendrick Lamar, or J. Cole, or Nipsey, the late great Nipsey Hussle. So, I did stuff like that, but ultimately I always, so entrepreneurship isn't something that I started during my career. I think entrepreneurship is like creativity. And what I mean by that is, like, it's either it's in you or it's not in you.
Yep.
There are certain subjects that you can teach, which is math. You can be 8 years old and be terrible at math, but if you work at it for 10 years, by the time you're 18, you can be a mathematician, right? I don't think creativity works that way. I think creativity is either you're an abstract, creative person, that the normal boundaries or perimeters of like how society says you should think like this, and here these are these different boxes or silos. I don't think that works for creativity. I think you just are like, you're like, that's cool. Like, some of the most intelligent people, they're just really like, they're very creative. They think outside the box. They kind of march to their own, band or tune. And that's how entrepreneurship is as well. And so my first experience with entrepreneurship, I actually started out picking up aluminum cans. Yeah, so like my two early memories of entrepreneurship, one was I used to pick up aluminum cans, and I used to have those like 50-gallon trash bags, real thick, like contractor grade thick.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And so my siblings and I, we would go and we would just, like, whether it be in trash cans on the side of the highway, at parks. People just, if you think 30 years ago, the recycle program that we have now that we see like the blue cans that wasn't the case 30 years ago. And so, you rewind back 30 years ago and recycling was this new buzzword, right? It was almost like AI is today,
Yep.
right? It was up and coming, but it wasn't there. Fast forward 30 years later and it's there. Everything's about recycle. You see it on every packaging. You see, receptacles everywhere. It's really evolved and come into its own space. And so I used to pick up cans with my siblings and then we would take it to the scrapyard and we would get, they would weigh the bags and that's how we made extra money.
Wow.
And so I took that money and, I've always been, smart with, like finances. And I would take that money and I would use that money to do other things, or save it. The other experience was back in junior high, which was probably like 7th grade. Yeah, about 7th grade. I used to sell candy. So before, schools allowed candy, like vending machines, back in my junior year, we used to have like, like this little candy stand where you can buy
Oh, yeah.
like chips, sodas and little bitty snacks, almost like a corner store bodega, but for, high school or junior high school kids, right? And I remember I think it was for Christmas, I got I think it was a 5 or 10 pound bag of this. It was Trolley is the name of is the brand, Trolley gummy worms. And it was 5 pound bag. And I was like, what am I going to do with 5 pounds of gummy worms? I'm not going to eat 5 pounds of gummy worms. So what I started to do was I went to Sam's Club. I bought a box of Ziploc bags and I broke it down and I put 10 gummy worms in each bag, in each little Ziploc bag. And I took those to school and I had a separate bag, like backpack, and I sold each bag for $1. And I want to say I had like 50 or 60 bags out of that one 5 or 10 pound bag of gummy worms. And so I'll be in class and people will look at me like, hey, let me, so I'll be selling, gummy worms. And I made a lot of money selling that to the point where the school shut me down because they were like, hey, it was outrageous that you don't have a license, you can't do that. And so, but I did that for at least a year and a half to 2 years selling gummy worms. So,
Wow.
so in terms of like, entrepreneurship has always been a part of me. It's been in my DNA. I think a lot of that comes from because originally I was born in Alabama and, my family, we have a farm and my, granddad, he farmed the land. He, would go out and, we had, pigs and he would slaughter the pigs and take that, and some of it he would, obviously save for us in a deep freezer, but then other he would sell. Same thing with like, cotton, my granddad, he farmed cotton and soybeans, and, it'd be very similar. And so, I see that and I look at like where that spirit came from. And I always say that like, the entrepreneurial spirit I was born with it at an early age. I realized it in junior high more so than, and when I was picking up cans, at a young age, I really realized that like, if you put forth the effort, you can make a living. And it was one, at that time let's just say I was in the 6th grade picking up cans, getting 160 or $70. That's a lot of money 30 years ago. It may not seem like a lot now, but when you cannot go get a job at McDonald's or, anywhere else because you're not 16, to be able to have your own spending money or your own pocket change, 30 years ago was really was real independence, right? Like it's no longer me asking my mom, hey, I want to go hang out at the mall. Like that back in the day, that's what kids did. We went to the mall.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Right. The thing is I don't know if they still do that now, but back in the day, we went to the mall or we went to the skating rink, right, on Fridays, Saturdays, but I didn't have to ask my mom. And because of that independence really, I think, kept me inspired to be like, well, if I can do this in junior high school, then the independence was like my drug, for lack of a better word, because I really liked the independence that I didn't have to rely on my mom to go out and say, hey, Brandon, here's $20, right? Like as a man, I felt like, as a young man, right, I felt like, my duty was to provide for myself without having to rely on my mom. So
That is awesome. And then you said yourself that you started Goodies Frozen Treats and Custards out of necessity because you saw a need for it, and that was started in 2012. And you started as a food truck only, and you made national headlines. I know you're humble and you won't talk about it, but you were featured on the Food Network. I read about you in a national magazine, and you wound up opening a physical site during COVID in Alexandria. But talk about, where that idea come from, because, people think anybody can do ice cream, but you really saw a need for it and really twisted the concept and done really well.
yeah, so it's, real quick, it's Goodies Frozen Custard and Treats.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Now you good, baby, no worries. And we just want to make sure everybody on YouTube and all the students know. And the thing is, I'll tell folks, like frozen custard is the, how do I say this? It is the big brother to ice cream. So traditional hard ice cream or traditional ice cream, it's not made, generally speaking, even at a premium, so it's not made fresh daily.
Okay.
So Ben and Jerry's, Haagen-Dazs is made offsite at a factory production facility, and then it's shipped out in, like let's say 3-gallon round tubs to each of their chain stores and or packed in pints for retail. We're a little different. We make everything that's on the menu that you see is made fresh daily. And so if I'm catering, I have to keep in mind that I have to make enough for the truck and for the shop.
Wow.
And so the reason why I started Goodies, one was because I got burned out of corporate America, and I always, like, again, from early, from a youngster, I always loved my independence. Working in a corporate environment, even with a lot of autonomy, there was still this parachute on me.
Yep.
Right. Which it only allowed me to go so far and so quickly to get, to the bottom to land. And so what I realized was that, like, I really wanted my independence. And so when I started looking at like what the marketplace was lacking, right? I always tell folks you have to have a USP, and folks are like, what is a USP? And so,
Selling point.
yeah, your unique selling point or proposition. What are you doing different? Why do people gravitate towards you? Why would they gravitate towards you? Right? What are you going to do different that's going to, like, when you whistle and a dog, their ears stick up, right? It's the same thing. How do you get people, how do you whistle and get people to have their ears stand up?
Wow.
To have their ears open. So I always looked at, like, what's going to be P in a cluttered marketplace. You had, at that particular time back in 2012, Froyo was, ubiquitous. It was like everything. And when I first brought this concept, together to like friends and family, everybody was like, yeah, but nobody knows frozen custard out here. And I'm like, that's the opportunity. Like, don't look at that, don't look at it as a hindrance, but look at that as an opportunity. The fact that people don't, it tells me that there is an opportunity for that.
Absolutely.
And I always looked at that and I said, well, we have your traditional traditional hard ice cream shops. You got the Ben and Jerry's, you got the Jenny's, you have the Cold Stone creameries.
Yep.
But what we don't have is frozen custard, and we don't have nostalgia.
Yeah.
And frozen custard is nostalgic. Like, it is, even growing up as a kid, when I would make, frozen custard with my mom, that is like the taste, the process of going from, creating it to, batching it. It is just a real nostalgic experience. I didn't feel like we had that here in DC or in the DMV. When I say DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And so I was like, how do I create this experience? How do I give people a throwback to when a handshake was a contract? Men, were gentlemen, ladies were ladies, kids had mannerisms, right? And heavy Chevy, Fords, Mopars, those were the common vehicles on the road, right? All while listening to Chuck Berry.
Oh yeah.
And I realized that wasn't there. And so I realized, I was like, well, if I'm gonna do it, I gotta be credible to Brandon first. Well, it started with, the truck, right? Because if you've ever been, when you guys are rural, Mississippi, and so when you think about it and you have farmland, you're not really seeing Mercedes and you're not seeing Lexus, SUVs and luxury vehicles. What you're seeing are pickup trucks, old school, vehicles. You're seeing, vans, postal vans, vintage, vintageness, right? And so when I thought about it, like even from living in Wisconsin, I was like, these are the vans that I saw. They delivered milk, right? Like milk, you need milk, heavy cream to make frozen custard. So when I started thinking about from a credibility standpoint, not only that, but the manufacturer of my van, Gigi, their origin was farm equipment, and they grew from making farm equipment to going into like light duty, trucks, and then semis, and then buses, school buses, and stuff like some of the stuff you see today. And so when I started thinking about it from a credibility standpoint, I picked the right van. And then I was like, well, what is it that these guys or girls would be wearing back in this period? Right. And, it was a very classic period. Everybody had their, pants up with their belt on, either wearing Chuck Taylors or, penny loafers or saddle shoes or, Converse or whatever. Right. And I was like, okay, now I know what the attire's like. Newsboy caps, bow ties, button ups, in the wintertime, cardigans, and khaki pants. And then in summertime, to be a little bit more fashion, you wear your shorts with your Argyle, socks. And so I put it all together. And then I was like, well, what is the music? I grew up listening to Wilson Pickett and, Sam Cooke and Marvin Gaye and Martha Reeves. And I was just like, that's the music. So I started building this roadmap in my mind, this visual, ideation book in my mind, what it looked like. And, when I started to put it together, like everybody was like, Brandon, you're in the nation's capital. You're going to sell frozen custard out of a vintage van in the summertime with a bow tie, newsboy cap, and a button up. Listening to Wilson Pickett. Do you really think that's a good idea? And I looked at it, I was like, yeah, it's a great idea. I said, just the way you explained it tells me there's a need for it. And so when I put everything together, I worked on it for maybe about a year. And when I launched, the Gigi, the truck, it's a 70-year-old truck, she broke down on me.
Oh,
Yeah, so she broke down, 3-speed on the tree, driving in DC traffic, with on 95, which is the expressway, and I'm cruising at 40 miles an hour, and she breaks down. But I'm like, well, I got buckets. I got to figure out how to get to the people. Anyways, I get it back running. I get curbside, and everybody was like, what drew them to the brand was the truck, right? It was like everything around us is being modernized. All the old historic buildings are being replaced by glass structures. The days of people speaking are far fewer in between. The days of listening to Wilson Pickett, unless you're on, like WAMU or some of the other, like Scooter Magruder, who's a local DJ, it just wasn't. It just wasn't there. But I started to realize when I turned the music on, I opened my back doors, and folks started hearing Marvin Gaye, and it was like, where is that coming from? And the sound started to waffle through the air, and people started listening to the sounds, and it gravitated. And they got around the corner and they saw this vintage truck with this kid like from the 50s. And I offered them a free sample, and I got a free sample. Like, what is this? I'm like, it's frozen custard. And they were like, tastes like ice cream. I'm like, it is, but it is the super premium version of ice cream. And people was like, this is delicious. Well, I was doing root beer floats when everyone else was not, root beer floats or floats in general, or a thing of yesteryear.
yeah.
It's really hard to find a place that does floats anymore. And so they're like, dude, like the product is great. The customer service is great. The branding is great. Like all these touch points really took me back. And I'm listening to Marvin Gaye, waiting in line for you to take the next order. I'm gonna sit on this bench right next to the truck and listen to Marvin Gaye or listen to Wilson Pickett, because like I was having a bad day at my cubicle. And this really just put a smile on my face. And I remember when I first started, I would buy like maybe 30,000 sample spoons at the beginning of my season, and I was just sampling. If even if you were an existing customer, I would still give you a sample because I felt like the product could do a better job of speaking than I could. So I just sampled everybody else, everyone, just 10 times over, to the point where I built this trust in the community. Like folks was like, listen, like we know this guy takes a lot of pride in what he does. We can tell the product is great, it's fairly priced. You know, he's one of one. Like he's not doing what everyone else is doing. He is one of one. I think successful entrepreneurs really have to find their USP.
Yep.
They have to find what's gonna make them one of one in a saturated marketplace, right? You know, maybe in a small rural town, it's not as much of an issue. But when you look at like DC, the DMV in general,
The most food trucks I've ever seen in my life. And it's not even
it,
close.
and to be honest with you, that's small. Pre-pandemic, I think there was 600.
Yeah. And yeah, and even before, yeah, because the last time I was there was a year prior to COVID, and I've never seen so many food trucks in my life.
The DC outside of like Portland, in LA, DC, if not number 3, number 4, definitely top 5 most robust food truck scenes. I mean, we had this festival called Truckaroo, and it was like before all the areas started getting redeveloped, it started out at like 30 or 40 food trucks from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. packed. From 11 to 11 p.m. it was packed, and people just was like, food trucks were like the modern day food court at the mall.
Yeah.
But it was all gourmet food. It was all chef inspired food that you would get at like a Michelin star restaurant, but on a truck. And people was like, this is amazing. This is amazing. You can get Jamaican, you can get Caribbean, you can get the frozen custard, you can get the Vietnamese food, the Peruvian food. I mean, there was so much diversity in the types of food that people were just like, even if we tried to go to a restaurant to hit this diversity in food options, we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And the quality was there. And so, you know, I remember I'll be at huge festivals, the Taste of DC, and, you know, in a sea, it's kind of like being, you know, you hear the statement like a sea of red or a sea of blue, and all you see is, and then there's that one little, if it's all red, there's that one little blue there. There's that, and they're like, what is that blue over there? And that's what it was for me. It was like, all we see are the same type of trucks.
Yeah.
All 40 are all the same. But we see this one over there in that corner, old school, with this, you know, red pinstripe, baby blue, you know, paint scheme with, you know, frozen custard white on top, with white walls and red wheels, playing Wilson Pickett. I've got to find out what this is.
Yeah.
Right. And folks would come and they'd be like, what is a donut wix? What's a custard wix? And I'm like, oh, well, it's 2 brownies with frozen custard in it and sprinkles or M&Ms or chocolate, whatever you want. And they're like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, yeah, I know. Something that we've been doing, right? Or they'll say, well, what is a red velvet cinnamon roll wix? I'm like, homemade cinnamon rolls split in half with custard. And, you know, depending on what the flavor of the cinnamon roll was, you know, is how I, you know, paired the top.
That is awesome.
So it grew, to be honest with you, you know, a lot of the things that I started doing just based on what I grew up with. Like, so I grew up eating cobblers and banana pudding, you know, cinnamon rolls. And, you know, I grew up in a very, you know, hands-on cooking family. I mean, back in the day growing up, you know, going out to dinner was a reserved primarily either one day out of the weekend or Sundays after church. And so my mom cooked all the time, and I would be in the kitchen cooking with her. So I learned how to cook from being, in the kitchen with her as her sous chef or whatever. And so everything you see on the menu is based solely on my experience as a young person in the kitchen cooking and the things that I grew up with.
Yeah, and then you did a great job on social media of showing pictures of your product, showing pictures of the concept, having great music to it, and you opened your first physical location in Alexandria just a few years ago. So talk about how that process was, because the convenience of the food truck has a lot of pros, but there's also a lot of pros to having a set location in a neighborhood.
Yeah. So the other thing about me is like, I've always understood the value of ownership. And I think a lot of people don't share the value of ownership as freely as they ought to. See, being an entrepreneur is more than just starting a business.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship is not just, I have an idea and I'm gonna start selling, let's just say, bags of Jimmy's, the sprinkles, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's more than that. It is like, okay, I have to think about this from a long-term strategy. I'm getting to entrepreneurship because, one, I want to have my independence. I'm also getting into entrepreneurship because one day, I may want a family, and how am I going to set them up
Yep.
15, 20, 30, 40 years indefinitely? What I've learned is you can't really do that by working for someone else. You're setting the person you're working for, you're setting them up to have, a long-term revenue stream that they will pass down to their family. So when I kept looking at it, I always looked at, like, the landlords, if you lease a building or a space, you're working to pay the landlord versus working to pay yourself first. And I said, before I make any money, I got to pay the landlord, insurance company, and the suppliers, the staff. And I just started thinking about it. And I'm like, wait a second, Brandon, like, your biggest expense is always going to probably be, depending on where you're at, will be rent. And so I said, well, if here it would, to think rent would be 6,000 to 10,000 is nothing. That's standard and is up here. When you think about that, that's a sizable amount of rent every month. The first 10,000 goes to the landlord before I ever got paid. So I was like, no, like, I didn't go in business to work, and the first week and a half, that money is for the landlord. The next week and a half is for all the other operating expenses. And then if I get to the last week, that's for me. And I was like, no. So for me, when I started, I always knew I wanted to own my building. And so from 2012 up until 2018, for 6 years, my focus was, yes, run and grow Goodies, but find a place that you can call home. And when you find that place that you can call home, buy the building.
Wow.
So I bought the building back in 2018, and it took 6 years to buy it. The previous owner, I wrote him a letter, and then he said, hey, let's meet at the Ice House and let's talk. And he wanted to lease it to me, but I didn't want to get into a lease. I always wanted to own, because I have 3 great nieces. They're 5. Well, tomorrow should be 5. So I'm going to say, 5, 6, and 9. And the thing that I tell them daily about the business in the Ice House, I tell them you have 3 options. Option 1, you can grow and run Goodies. Option 2, you guys can start your own business. Option 3, you can lease the space to someone else. And I said, option 4 is not an option, but it's an option of what you cannot do, which is you can never sell the building. And they was like, well, why is option 4 not an option? I said, well, because I said, I said, in perpetuity, this building can always provide you a living. If you sell it, you get the money, unless you're going to reinvest it. And the likelihood of that is highly unlikely, because, money influences oftentimes poor decisions. And so I said, Yeah, so I said, you can never sell it. And so they're like, okay. And, my daily routine with them is positive affirmation of what they can do with the building. I said, because at the end of the day, if you don't want to work for someone, you have the option to work for yourself, grow goodies. You three are going to be brighter than I ever could be, right? Let's just be real honest. 3 minds, you have 3 minds, you have 6 hands, 30 fingers, right? 6 sets of eyes, 6 sets of ears. They're going to be able to see 6 times than I ever would be able to. Hear, touch, grab, even just the way technology is changing. And so I told them that, and they were like, I understand. And I was like, do you see why I'm able to get up every morning with you to get you to school, get you guys breakfast, make you breakfast tacos? I said, that's because I work for myself. And I was like, if I had a structured job, the likelihood of me being able to do these things would be less likely.
Wow.
Right. And so they was like, oh, I get it, Uncle Brandon. I said, and actually in the summer, instead of going to camps, I want you guys to be here working. We're going to create something, whether it's a lemonade stand, whether it's a hot dog stand. I have a grill. I'll grill. Your job is to take the orders, bag the hot dogs, you grab the bottles of water, whatever it might be, and hand it to the customer, right? And so they were like, really? I'm like, yes. I'm like, that's just one. I said, but you can do that because it's your building, right? They're like, oh, I have flexibility. That's great, right? So I'm trying to teach them these really in my eyes, basic principles of the value of entrepreneurship and ownership, right? You can own a brand, but never really own the legacy piece.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it took me 6 years to get the building that I wanted, but I've been in business 11 years. So it was a 11-year process to get what I wanted, but it was really a 6-year window of actively going after it.
That's awesome.
Right? So when I opened during the pandemic. The building needed to be fully rehabbed. I didn't get any support from during that time, the local, community and city was giving grant money out. I didn't get anything. I bootstrapped the whole project. And yeah, I bootstrapped the whole project. And a lot of folks were like, how did this guy do this without the support of us? Well, when you think long-term, like I said earlier, I've always had a long-term strategy. In order to have that long-term strategy come to fruition, you've got a plan for those, the total 11 years.
Yeah.
Right. Because it took me it was a 6-year process, but it could have been a 9-year process. It just happened to be, I started in 2012, 2018 is when we consummated the deal. But it could have been 2022. I had to get prepared for that. I had to be in position to when that opportunity presented itself, that I would be in position to buy it, that I would be in position to purchase it. So I thought about it back in 2012 when I was starting the business. I have this ideation board where I write down my various thoughts and ideas, and I'm like, I want to execute these things. That was one of the things that I wrote down. I was like, I have to own a historic building that reflects the brand.
Yeah.
I didn't know when it was going to happen. I didn't know how it was going to happen. Right. I didn't even know the building, the city. I knew none of that. But what I knew was that this was my ideation board. I had fulfilled many of those things on there, except that marquee piece. But I kept working and I kept looking. I was looking in all like DC, Maryland, Alexandria, even as far south down as Richmond, Virginia.
Wow.
Which is an hour, probably like an hour, depending on traffic, hour and a half away.
Yeah, on a good traffic day.
On a good traffic day, right? And I had put in some offers on some buildings. It never panned out. The previous owner called me, sent me a text. He said, "Hey, Brandon, are you still interested?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." I said, "Have your attorney draw up an agreement. I'll be by in an hour with the deposit funds to show my sincerity. Hour later, I was there. He was like, "Oh, you're serious?" I'm like, "Absolutely. I've been waiting on this day. I knew it was going to happen. I've been waiting on this day." So the long-term strategy was planned, right? I just didn't know when I was on actually execute it. And so, me being able to execute it, I had to be prepared to execute it. You don't want to fumble the ball on the 1 yard line, something that you planned planned and prepared for all these years, and then you're literally on the 1 yard line and you fumble. No, that's why we condition that's why athletes condition themselves, and they go to the gym early in the morning or late at night. That's why Olympic, athletes are always constantly training, and they're prepping for when they get to, the Olympics, wherever it's held at. They're at optimal condition and shape to perform, right?
Yep.
And so that's what it was for me.
That's awesome. Well, I do have some questions from the students. These are all seniors, and they've
Okay.
all come up with their own business concepts for the class. But this first one's really good. This is Justin Clerk. And
Okay.
he asked, what are some of the most unique combinations of flavors that you have seen go well together that other people may not have thought of?
So I don't do a ton. So I guess I should say that too. I don't. So my brand wasn't built on flavors. Okay. I never wanted to take the USP isn't doing what others are doing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But it's doing what they're not doing and making them want to mimic you or replicate what you're doing.
Wow,
Okay.
that's awesome.
Like I tell folks that we set trends, we don't follow them.
There you go.
Okay. When you are confident and you have your own USP, then you're setting the trends and you're making other people say that's actually really cool, right? I give you that to say that, like, I never built my brand based on flavors. I based it on desserts and treats that I grew up with.
Interesting.
I took that and I said, okay, now how can I combine these homemade cinnamon rolls, these homemade red velvet cinnamon rolls with this delicious frozen custard? Oh, well, what if I split this in half and I stuffed it full of custard, and instead of using cream cheese icing, I use dark chocolate and maybe sprinkle some pecans on it. Let's try it, right? And so I would do a lot of mashups like that. Or I'm like, I wonder how, again, one of the flavors that I've made, which is people love, is a sweet potato pie, frozen custard. It's like legit sweet potato pie. Like, I cook the sweet potatoes and then I puree them. And so it has the texture of like baby food.
Oh man, that sounds good.
Right. But I season it as if I'm making a sweet potato pie. Can you hear me? I can't hear you now.
Oh, I got buzzed by the office. You're fine.
Oh, okay. And then I blended into the custard. And so everybody that tried it, they were like, this tastes just, I'm like, it is sweet potato pie. I just didn't bake it.
Wow.
But it's in a custard form. And people were like, that's cool. And but again, I grew up eating sweet potato pies. So I'm like, how can I take that? Yes, I do a warm sweet potato pie with a scoop of custard and caramel sauce. I do that. But I actually want to take it a step further. Like, take that pie, mash it up, make it into custard, and now you have sweet potato pie, pints of frozen custard, even when you're not, thinking about, traditional sweet potato pie. So hopefully that answered your question. I didn't really focus on, offering different flavors. My focus was offering unique desserts that people would say Goodies did that first.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because if the fewer flavors you're buying, the less money you're spending. So that especially in the food industry, that is a great point when it comes to food cost. This is Shania Charleston, and she asked, "How did you come up with the name Goodies?"
Well, to be honest with you, believe it or not, Goodies is ubiquitous for many things. So I remember I used to say, "Oh, I want some fashion goodies," right? If like, for example, on Pinterest, all of my pins are based off of the word goodies. So it was like fashion goodies, historic, building goodies or architectural building goodies, musical goodies, shoe goodies, right? and when you go to a restaurant, people say, "Oh, I want a goodies bag or to go bag." When I really thought about it, the word goodies meant so many pleasant things.
Oh,
It was used in a very comforting way, right? In a very soothing way, whether it was food, whether it was like, "Oh, you look nice. Oh, you have a, oh, you have some nice goodies on." Like, tell me about those Air Jordan throwback, right? Those, you know, baby blue Jordan, bag of goodies you have. And I just kept thinking, I'm like, wow, goodies it means so many different things, right? Like my brand, it means so many different things. You're talking about someone who loves vintage cars. You have the truck. Someone who loves classical music, right? Motown, Wilson Pickett. That is some goodies, right? You have some musical goodies. You have some automotive goodies, right? You have some fashion goodies. You have some food/dessert goodies. So when you started thinking about that, I was like, this really represented everything that I wanted my brand to be, which
wow.
it's a brand that touched all of these things that most people can relate to. Like, because I can go to a car show, and I'll have an old timer who's like, I haven't seen that van in 70 years.
Wow.
It brings back so many memories. I'm like, yep, that's what I wanted, right? So that's where the name Goodies came about. I didn't want to just focus on frozen custard. That is my core. The treats came about because, again, growing up, in a traditional Southern, family, you're going to get banana pudding, you're going to get the sweet potato pies, you're going to get the cinnamon rolls, you're going to get all these other desserts that, complement the frozen custard. And so that's where I mashed them together. I said, okay, you have goodies, frozen custard, and all the treats that's going to, marry well, with those, with the custard.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a simple name, but that's not a simple idea. No, this is a good one too. This is Miles Woodard, and he asked, as the life of the business grows, would you ever consider changing to a different time period as the age of your customers gets older?
So that's a good question. Well, the I think the beauty of being classic is that you never grow out of style. I think you grow out. I think you become more relevant as we get more technologically advanced, right? I think the more that AI becomes a part of everyday life, um, social platforms like TikTok, which will evolve it too, right? So if you think 20 years ago we had MySpace.
Yep, that's before their
Oh,
time.
all right, you know about it then. So before there was a Facebook, before there was a Twitter, right? We had MySpace. Well, they know about Snapchat, right? 10 years ago, Snapchat was everything. It's lost a lot of steam. It's lost a lot of luster. But if everything you see is always overstimulating your mind, there are times where you just like, I want something that's just simple, good, nostalgic, that takes me down memory lane. And so I don't see the issue of growing out of relevance because it's a classic brand. I think if anything, it's going to stay relevant, more relevant, because as everything around you changes and the 100-year-old building is replaced with a glass building, and the neighborhoods, like especially in a place like DC and Alexandria, where neighborhoods that once were very historic are now being replaced with, modernization, and minimalistic, architectural designs. Having a simple place that is simple, I think people are going to love. Not only that, but Goodies appeals to all age and gender groups. I have an 80-year-old guy who loves Goodies because of the, vintage van, and he drove it when he worked for Coca-Cola in Atlanta. Or I'll have a little kid who is, well, my nieces are a great example. I'll have, my nieces who are like, can you please bring the truck to the school because I want everybody to see it.
Oh,
And they get the chance to jump on the truck and serve.
wow.
So the thing about a simple yet well thought out brand or executed brand is that, like, you're able to connect with everyone from young to old. And then everything in the middle is, it's like a sandwich. You have the top, bread, the bottom bread, and then everything in the middle, it gets squished or sandwiched together with the two top. And I think that's when you look at, there's the young and then there's the old. And really good brands, you know, they do that. I mean, you can even take a look at like, you know, some of the more classic brands like Coca-Cola that's been around for 100+ years is a great example, right? I mean, yes, they're evolving, but classic Coke is still the most popular one. People wanted, when they switched over to plastic, they wanted that glass bottle.
Yeah, and the new Coke is one of the biggest flops, one of the biggest product flops in American history. And
Yep.
that's going back to the classic. That's a great point.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think a lot of times. Okay, go ahead.
I just got one more from the students. This is Octavia Johnson. And she asked, what would you say is the hardest part of being an entrepreneur?
Well, that's actually, I mean, there's a lot, but I mean, what comes to mind is time management. What most folks won't tell you about being entrepreneurship is that you're the CEO, the mechanic. Well, in my particular case, right? So you're the CEO, the mechanic, the accountant, the baker. You're the tire rotator person. I mean,
And the driver.
and the driver, right? I mean, you know, there's a lot of hats that you wear that I think so many people don't, you know, entrepreneurs don't tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, entrepreneurship on the outside is glorified. Oh my gosh, you know.
Oh man, tell me about it.
But they don't have those honest conversations with you. Someone can look at a company like Facebook and say, oh, his story, he started in his dorm room, you know, at Harvard and blah blah, and you know, the rest is history. Blah blah. Met the Wise twins, and the rest is history. That's really a boiled down version of it. What folks don't tell you is that, like, listen, man, you're gonna have super early mornings, you're gonna have late nights, the truck is gonna break down, you're gonna run out of gas, you're gonna be underprepared because you just started this business, you don't really know it all that well, you're learning as you go, but you're letting everybody know that I'm gonna get it right, but just be patient with me, right? You're learning as you go. Like, I didn't come from a culinary background, or my family they didn't have a restaurant. So everything that I'm doing, I'm learning as I go.
Wow.
And so as you learn as you go, you're taking this hat, you put it on for a little bit. Oh, you got to take it off. This hat, and it's just this constant rotation. Hat, off, on. And I was like, wow, this is. I'm like, no one ever told me about this, right? Like, this is just stuff that I learned as I went along. And so, you know, to answer your, I mean, I've kind of answered it, but the best way to answer it is that, like, you've got to be a steward of your time. If you're not a steward of your time, then so many things will get pushed to the wayside. And by the time you start looking at it, you're like, okay, so I'm behind on filing my quarterly taxes. I've got neglected maintenance on the truck. I didn't order enough cups, spoons, napkins, or straws, or lids. Right? So you start, oh, I have this event that's an hour away from me, right? But then I still have to get to show. So you've got to, I think, you know, at least one of the if I had to say, you know, it's definitely in the top three, is you have to be a good steward of your time. I mean, and to be honest with you, that's just not in business, but that's really across the board. I mean, you have to be a good steward of your time in school, right? Like, if school starts at 8 o'clock, you're not waking up at 7:55. You're not going to make it, right? You know, how you plan to prepare each day, you know, the night before for each day ahead of you is really going to determine the success of you as a student, you as an entrepreneur, you as a teacher or a professor, right? These are things that you do in advance. Like, good athletes don't start training the day of the competition. They prepare well in advance, so that when they meet that day that they've been wanting for, they're prepared. Like, back to what I was saying originally about buying the building. I had conditioned myself for 6 years. I didn't know when that opportunity was going to present itself, but I always felt in my heart it would. And when it did, I was in position to buy it. I was prepared. But being prepared is a direct relationship with what? Time management.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're up against the bell here, and we're almost out of time. And we thank you so much for joining us. It's been a huge thrill for me. I've been a fan of yours ever since I found out about you. And just know your footprint is reaching across the country. because I found out about you in a national magazine. I saw the news stories, and it's just such a great example for these young people to see somebody not only so passionate, but so skilled and didn't even have the background in what you're doing, and really think about why entrepreneurship needs them. But before we go, tell us where to find you online, because you got some great social media posts.
Yeah, thank you. Well, again, it's Goodies, Frozen Custard and Treats. We're on all social media. That's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have Snapchat too, but I don't use it. But just focus on the other ones. The handle is at Goodies. That's 3 M's, GOODIES. And man, I respond to every message. So even after this, this call today, if you guys have any questions or just like, hey, Brandon, like, it was great talking to you or listening to you. And if you want to run an idea past me, right, and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? I'm thinking of starting a t-shirt company. I'll give you my honest assessment of it. So feel free to buzz me anytime.
That's awesome. Well, again, one of the hottest entrepreneurs in the DMV, one of the coolest concepts I've ever seen, Brandon Byrd, owner of Goodie's Frozen Custard and
Custard. That's right.
Right that time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. You guys have a great day.
All right, see you, buddy.
Bye-bye.